you can write a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand through the reactions, and then we'll call on you. So I know there was people wanted to know where the opera show is, and you told us, which is marvelous. So do I see any questions? Maybe other co-hosts help me if you see people who have questions. Carol, I have one question to start us off with, which is, how have you worked with your own work in relationship to working with others as a educator? How have you as an artist responded? Has this influenced your own work? Do you, how do you find time for your own work?
Well, that's a good question. Usually some of my installations have been about freedom. I have a bird, several pieces I did with bird pieces and installing them. But the most recent, I think there's a connection to my whole new work I'm doing. And it's kind of, when I've part of the reason someone asked me about 5 years ago why I started going into prison, and it's a good question, but I felt like a part of what made it oddly comfortable for me was growing up with concentration camp stories, with Holocaust stories and people surviving them and having lived there and through that. And it just made it less daunting somehow. And so I've started about 8 years ago, and now more so, working on a series of artwork about, I had a cousin that survived Auschwitz as a family tailor to the high command at Auschwitz. And I started researching children's clothes from back then in Germany, and how, you know, would the Jewish kids' clothes have been different from the clothes he had to sew for those families. And so what I've ended up doing, you sort of see them behind me, is knitting these kind of ghosts of the clothes that all those children that died, in honoring them. And then they're layered between in silk. So there's a moire effect so that they're more escaped, they're more gone. So there's always been some weird connection there for me. And this is, I'm starting to articulate it in this way. But often the work hasn't been directly, I've never done a direct prison piece per se. It's sort of like, it's hard for me to feel like that's my story to tell, but I am, with the support of Gregory Sale, who was in town and also has a lot to say about prisons, as do many people here, I bet, like Peter. So, you know, I am starting to work with a piece about having people, and I'm still working on it, but it's going to be a piece probably about huge amounts of years, the sentences.
Yes.
So that's evolving. Thanks.
Well, Gregory has his hand up.
Carol, can you, you know, it's so interesting to me because I see the, you know, the sort of the working as a sort of facilitator and a teacher and a support. And then I see, you know, these sort of more standard notions of like, what is our art practice? What's our individual art practice? And so you were just sort of speaking about that. And I kind of want to open a space just for a little bit and ask you to speak to this amazing work that I just see you do again and again and again, where you hold this space for healing, for processing, for these women and these men to know themselves better, to have expression and agency into the world and with their work. And you know, you do this heavy lifting that a lot of teaching artists don't do. You're always getting the next new show at the university space or the opera space. You at Alcatraz. You're always, making that connection out to the world. And I think that's actually part of your art practice. And I just was wondering if you could sort of talk to that a little bit. Maybe you don't agree with me, but I'm just wondering if you can talk to it a bit.
Yeah, no, I thank you. And I do, I guess I just, I came of age in school before social practice was a term. And we worked in community arts, and I haven't had to define myself that way or the other, but I do feel like it's clearly a part of what I do. And it doesn't have, end up as something I can show, but I call myself now the bird theme. I feel like I'm this, bird flying over the walls back and forth with San Quentin, bringing the artwork out, bringing the messages back, just, it is what I do. And, you as an academic would be better able to give me language for it, but it's some sort of social practice-y thing. Interacting in community and, technically, I suppose, curating to bring the work out and set up the panels and reaching out and as much as we can, like bringing in Sharon and visiting Sharon's class, Sharon Andre's class, or bringing Sharon's class in from Berkeley City College and having dialogue, sit down, 2-hour talks between the students from the outside and the men inside, and they're talking about their artwork. And, I feel like that's supporting the men as artists. And it's also for them this tremendous breath of real air, from the outside, fresh perspectives. And, all of that's part of what I like to try to do for the program and to help the men grow and change. But I don't know what the name for it is.
Well, I think Gregory's onto something, and you're an interdisciplinary artist, and the art world, unfortunately, and our education makes us separate all these things into little categories, but you work in a very holistic way, and your arts research, your community activism, all that it's all the same thing. You're an artist, it's all part of your practice, which is an interdisciplinary one. And so I think I consider this part of your practice. What you showed today is part of the artwork that you do.
Yeah, I would like to reiterate that, Carol. And I'm very grateful that Gregory said what he said. I think that so many of the people that I know that are teaching healing work, you have a unique personality and gifts to bring together the things without and keeping them. I'm not sure how you stay sane, but you stay super sane and you bring sanity in a way that few people can. You really are a remarkable combination. And I'm so glad I know you.
Well, thank you. It's very mutual. So glad I know you. You're a role model, Andre.
I'm just older.
I mean, that's what role model means, but.
Hello, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. And Carol, this is a question you must get asked all the time. But how can we support you? What can we do? I feel like giving you a bunch of art supplies and then taking you out for a pedicure on both levels. How can we help?
Oh, thank you. Well, actually donating to William James Association is helpful, because we just had the San Quentin budget cut actually by 2/3 by the California Arts Council, but San Quentin is wiggling the money around so that we end up so some places that aren't open and don't need the full amount they have were cut by 1/3 only. That's a huge cut. And, it's not like we're a wealthy program to begin with. So if you want to donate to William, it's prisonartsproject.org, and there's a big old donate button there. That's one thing. And, if you want to come in as a guest artist when we get more normalized in terms of COVID and, present your work and or a project, and mostly just to give people feedback. So there's that dialogue. So one of our visitors said he felt like he was back in graduate school, just talking about the work with everyone. So that would be a big help too.
I'd love to, anytime.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Sally, are you talking? You need to unmute.
Yeah, I was wondering how, because you seem to know so much about the people who've been released. How do you keep up with them? And that must be gathering a lot of people.
Well, it's Facebook is a big connection. I'm one of those people, I've stayed on Facebook because it's free. And when people get out, that's where there's a large community and network.
Yeah.
And then when we have shows, we always try to include people who are out now as well as work from inside. So one of the biggest long-range goals and plans with Arts and Corrections in general for William James Association is for people on the outside to do more and to be able to have something like a studio space and classes for reentry, people in reentry. So it's a supportive community environment that could offer some of what the prison studio has, but address the needs in reentry. Because generally, unfortunately, people in reentry are so overwhelmed dealing with housing and all the life things, and have 20, 30 years where they haven't been working technically. I mean, it's a really tough time, and people don't have time for their art as much until they're established. But if we had something that could just be a drop-in studio and classes once a week and a place to process, that's something we want.
Oddly enough, from Chicago, who has started a program for released prisoners, and it's kind of a Socratic method. They have classrooms and they sit around and read stuff and then talk about it critically. So it's really a critical thinking thing, kind of University of Chicago based or idea. And she's been going for about 5 years. I'll send you her website because you have a lot in common.
Well, thank you. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, Illinois is actually, Christina's got her hand up, but Illinois, there's a lot of really strong work that's happened with the prisons and arts out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have noticed any shift in people's work from when they're inside to when they are outside and continuing doing their art, or is it really consistent?
It's pretty consistent. They have less time for it when they're out, but that's a good question. I'm trying to think. Like Henry is such, his work is really just continues to evolve. He's really devoted to his artwork. I'm thinking some people sort of, well, I'm just saying someone else, Isaiah, he's done a lot more just documenting his life now. It's just really sweet that his work inside was always, historical or other people. It wasn't family, and now it's what's around him, and it's a way to enrich his own experience of his life and his connection to his family. So that's another change. Yeah, but it's a huge challenge to keep doing artwork when people get out because of all the survival issues. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Manoush?
Anoush?
Yeah, I was wondering, amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Carol. I've been very enjoying learning about what you have been doing and also the work that I see coming out of prison. I'm very interested in healing and art that it's happening through your practice. One question that I have you noticed any difference between the gender, people who are in prisons or in terms of like their art projects when they're in or when they're out, or any difference in terms of gender?
You know, I worked with the women up through like the late 80s and didn't follow, you know, that was in LA, and I haven't followed that. I wonder if anyone here has. It's a good question, and I don't know. I don't know because I'm not in touch with the women afterwards now. So I
You know,
would
now,
guess.
now that's the gender is a big topic and issue these days. I wonder if there is any research or any statistic of how much that becomes a, I don't know, in case, you know.
I don't know, but I would guess that the women get out have even more that they have to do than the men, but I don't know. But, you know, it would make it even harder with dealing with family as well as self-support and jobs and parole reports and all that. So it would be challenging, but much needed to have support for art then. But I haven't followed anyone anymore from down in the South. So. Well, thank you all
Yeah.
for coming.
Right.
Really,
Thank
really
you.
nice.
Thank you, Carol.
All this feedback's great. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question still. One of
Sure.
my favorite phrases in your description of this talk was about talking about generational trauma. And can you say anything about that? Like how you saw healing of that particular, you know, I mean, there's a lot in the culture now about how trauma gets passed down from generation to generation. So is there any way you could say something specifically about that?
Well, I think if there's real shift and interference at one level, and it's, you know, like, let's say someone in prison goes through that kind of restorative justice work and with the art helping them with whatever, and they can actually, you know, go home and or from afar, unfortunately, you know, give that awareness to their child, you know, that you don't have, I don't know exactly how, but I think that if you can share that awareness, it can change that, just it getting passed down, because that's all people experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it could change, you know, people who go through that kind of self-awareness and change, it can change their behavior. So they're less inclined to react angrily or in whatever way without being aware. Oh, that's my trigger, that, oh, you know, and they could act differently in their family when they were to get out, or even in visits and phone calls. It could help intervene and stop, you know, change the behavior that's passed on and modeled. But I'm not a therapist.
Are there therapists in the prison that use the artwork to help them?
I don't know of any. I believe they've once in a while in facilities where they house the people who are put there with mental health problems, like outside of Tascadero, there was a prison or a mental hospital that had a prison ward. They actually hire art therapists to help in that situation in the state. And once in a while, I've heard of art therapists being hired in a prison, and they probably work with the psychologists. But I don't know of people, you know, none of the men that have, you know, have talked about that, or I don't know many therapists. I do know when I started there at CRC that the caseload for the psychiatrist was somewhere around 400.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, like the counselors, it's not adequately staffed and funded. And I'm sure there are some individuals that do try to use art, especially depending on the person, you know, but it's a tough situation. Yeah. Yeah. But there are certified art therapy rules for who's an art therapist in California, and there are a few jobs like that. Yeah.
Not enough.
Not enough. No.
Yeah.
Carol, it was so amazing to see the breadth of this work and to see the work from the 80s and connecting it with the work from today. Thank you. I really appreciated it.
Thanks. I'm glad you came. Yes, it's great to see you again. Great to see everybody. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
petermertz.com. Don't forget to check that out. Okay.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Okay. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely
It
presentation.
was great. Thank you.